Okay, well, today is the last week of our summer series, which I have called Riddles from Q, Q being a term. Oh, yes, children, goodbye. Children are released for children's church. Fly, be free. Yes, go. So, Bible scholars use this term Q to refer to what is suspected to be a source that was used by both Matthew and Luke in the writings of their Gospels, along with other sources of Jesus' teaching. And by the way, that Q stands for a German word, Quelle, which means source, so has nothing to do with the Q of the political issues or the Q from Star Trek, in case you were wondering. So today, again, is our last week of this, and we're going to finish up by zeroing in on a key passage where Jesus sort of lays out some radical requirements for anybody that would follow him as his disciple. And these sayings that we're going to look at today function for Jesus as a warning to those who wanted to follow him. And so we are reminded today of the high level of commitment that Jesus expects for those of us that would be his followers on the earth. Now, if we cast our eye over world history, we can find many, many examples of incredible human sacrifice, courage, and selflessness. And just what human beings are capable of is really remarkable. And I want to share one example of this with you. It's a famous example in some regard, though most people still don't know of it. I'm going to read you a letter from the Civil War, certainly the most famous Civil War letter. It's written by a Union major named Sullivan Ballou, and he writes this letter kind of on the eve of battle to his wife, and in case he doesn't make it, in case he doesn't survive. So the easiest way to do this would have been just play a YouTube video. They have this done nicely with pictures and music and everything. But the problem is none of the YouTube videos actually read the whole letter. And I thought it was worth our time to hear the whole thing. So I'm going to drop the lights, and I'm going to read you this letter from, again, a Union general in the Civil War, 1861. July the 14th, 1861, Washington, D.C. My very dear Sarah, the indications are very strong that we shall move in a few days, perhaps tomorrow. Lest I should not be able to write you again, I feel impelled to write lines that may fall under your eye when I shall be no more. Our movement may be one of a few days' duration and full of pleasure, and it may be one of severe conflict and death to me. Not my will, but thine, O God, be done. If it is necessary that I should fall in the battlefield for my country, I am ready. I have no misgivings about or lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged, and my courage does not halt or falter. I know how strongly American civilization now leans upon the triumph of the government, and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the Revolution. And I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt. But, my dear wife, when I know that with my own joys I lay down nearly all of yours and replace them in this life with cares and sorrows, when, after having eaten for long years the bitter fruit of orphanage myself, I must offer it as their only sustenance to my dear little children, is it weak or dishonorable, while the banner of my purpose floats calmly and proudly in the breeze, that my unbounded love for you, my darling wife and children, should struggle in fierce, though useless contest with my love of country? I cannot describe to you my feelings on this calm summer night, when 2,000 men are sleeping around me, many of them enjoying the last, perhaps, before that of death, and I, suspicious that death is creeping behind me with his fatal dart, am communing with God, my country, and thee. I have sought most closely and diligently and often in my breast for a wrong motive, in thus hazarding the happiness of those I loved, and I could not find one. A pure love of my country and of the principles I have often advocated before the people, and the name of honor that I love more than I fear death, have called upon me and I have obeyed. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me to you with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence could break, and yet my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly on with all these chains to the battlefield. The memories of the blissful moments I have spent with you come creeping over me, and I feel most gratified to God and to you that I have enjoyed them so long. And hard it is for me to give them up and burn to ashes the hopes of future years, when God willing we might still have lived and loved together and seen our sons grow up to honorable manhood around us. I have, I know, but few and small claims upon divine providence, but something whispers to me, perhaps it is the wafted prayer of my little Edgar, that I shall return to my loved ones unharmed. If I do not, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I love you, and when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. Forgive my many faults and the many pains I have caused you. How thoughtless and foolish I have oftentimes been. How gladly would I wash out with my tears every little spot upon your happiness and struggle with all the misfortune of this world to shield you and my children from harm, but I cannot. I must watch you from the spirit land and hover near you while you buffet the storms with your precious little freight and wait with sad patience till we meet to part no more. But oh, Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth and flit unseen around those they loved, I shall always be near you. In the garish day and in the darkest night, amidst your happiest scenes and gloomiest hours, always, always. And if there be a soft breeze upon your cheek, it shall be my breath. Or the cool air fans your throbbing temple, it shall be my spirit passing by. Sarah, do not mourn me dead. Think, I am gone, and wait for thee, for we shall meet again. As for my little boys, they will grow as I have done, and never know a father's love and care. Little Willie is too young to remember me long, and my blue-eyed Edgar will keep my frolics with him among the dimmest memories of his childhood. Sarah, I have unlimited confidence in your maternal care and your development of their characters. Tell my two mothers, his and hers, I call God's blessing upon them. Oh, Sarah, I wait for you there. Come to me and lead there my children. Sullivan. He was killed shortly after that at the First Battle of Bull Run. He never mailed the letter. It was found in his trunk and brought to Sarah. She was 24 years old, never remarried, and died in 1917 at the age of 82, and it's thought that the original of the letter she had buried with her. That's something, huh? Like, that's real. That's not fake. And there's an enduring example, I think, of all sorts of profoundly moving themes, right? But chief among them, sacrifice, courage, and the willingness to lay down what we want for the sake of some greater cause. It's precisely this sort of pull that Jesus lays out for us today in these sayings that we will look at. It's this kind of commitment that he is asking for those of us who would be his followers. So let's look at this together. This teaching is found in both Matthew and Luke, and not in Mark. So again, it seems both Matthew and Luke pulled this from this other source they had that was not Mark's gospel, which most people think they were also using. And we'll see that Matthew and Luke will put this teaching in two slightly different settings. Look first at Matthew on your left column. And yeah, I hope you got a bulletin when you came in. It'll be useful for you. I have a handout in there with the layout of these passages. If not, you can get up and get one in the back of the church there. Those of you online can download one there somewhere near the video. So look at Matthew on the left column, verse 18. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. So in Matthew, this is up in Galilee where Jesus has been working and ministering, and he just did a major healing, and now a crowd gathers, and Matthew has Jesus crossing the lake now, and then this account takes place. Look, by contrast, in Luke's gospel, Luke has put this right towards the beginning of really the key major central section in the Gospel of Luke. So look at verse 57 on your right column from Luke's Gospel. It says, as they were walking along the road. What road, we wonder? Well, Luke will return to this concept of the road in this major section of Luke's Gospel. And what Luke does in his Gospel, he starts off with a Galilee ministry, and then there's a huge central section in Luke's Gospel that Luke puts together and edits together where he has Jesus making a long, final, climactic journey to Jerusalem. And what is Jesus going to Jerusalem to do in Luke's Gospel? He's going to be rejected, crucified, and killed. And so in this major center section, Luke weaves in all sorts of themes of hardship and discipleship to kind of prepare the disciples as this is happening, and also us that would be disciples of Jesus. So just look at, in Luke's Gospel, on the screen, the passage right before what we're looking at today. So this is 9:51. Here's that key transition verse in Luke's Gospel. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. So in Luke's Gospel, there's the pivot. And now Jesus leaves Galilee, and he advances towards his destiny of the cross. Look what's first told, verse 52. And he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was headed for Jerusalem. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, "Hey, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy them?" Because they thought it'd be a good idea just to kill them all, you know. But Jesus turned and rebuked them. Then his disciples went to another village. Okay, then we have our saying that we're looking, or our encounters that we're looking at here today. Yes. Let's look at the teaching in Luke. Look at verse 57 again. As they were walking along the road, a man said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." Okay, that's pretty good, right? Here's somebody who's been impressed with Jesus, struck by Jesus, and now wants to follow him. This guy says, "I will follow you, Jesus, wherever you go." Now, Jesus kind of had followers in two senses back then, literal and non-literal, maybe we can say. Non-literal are maybe followers of Jesus that were spiritual followers of Jesus, who committed themselves to Jesus and his teachings and way of life, but they did not literally walk around with Jesus throughout Israel, right? I think of the man that Jesus delivered from the demons across the sea, the Gerasene demoniac, who wanted to come with Jesus. The guy was like, "Please let me come with you." And Jesus said, "No, you go back and tell your family what God has done for you." So there's a follower of Jesus who didn't literally follow, but stayed behind. Okay, but there were another category of people, of followers of Jesus, that literally actually followed him around. Like if you've been watching this Chosen TV show, you see portrayals of this, right? And so probably that's what this guy is offering to be. He says, "I want to be that." Okay, because notice what he says, "I will follow you wherever you go." So here's a volunteer, it seems, to be one of those followers of Jesus, is going to leave home and physically walk around with him. Well, that's pretty good, we would say. But notice this does ring with a deeper level of meaning, especially in Luke's Gospel. Look at that line there. As they were walking along the road, the man said, "I'll follow you wherever you go." We know, as a reader of Luke's Gospel, where is Jesus' road going? It's going to the cross. And so this guy is saying perhaps something at a level he doesn't quite realize what he's offering and committing to do. Because this road is going to go, as one ancient writer wrote, to Gethsemane, to the cross and the grave. And if this guy's going to follow Jesus wherever he's going to go, the guy doesn't realize it, but this is where he's volunteering to follow Jesus. So look how Jesus will respond. Well, I guess first, look at Matthew's version on the left column. Gives us a different angle on who this guy is. Look at verse 19. Ensuring the same saying, teaching. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Okay, so interesting. So we find out this is not just anybody. This is actually a teacher of the law, Matthew says. A religious professional, one of the scribes. So here is a heavy hitter, so to speak. So this could be a really good follower, a really good disciple. So notice this teacher of the law calls Jesus what? teacher. Okay, there's a good term of respect. And this guy is willing to say, I'll follow you wherever you go. So here, there seems to be a respect for Jesus, and there seems to be a real humility here. And so in the mind of this teacher of the law, he probably thinks, okay, what I'm doing in offering this is a big sacrifice I'm making. This is a profound thing I'm offering to do here. So look at Jesus' reply to him. Notice it's exactly word for word in both Matthew and Luke, like the punchline of a joke. Often doesn't change, even if there's some variety in how it's introduced. Verse 20 in one of them. Actually, they're identical. You look at either one. Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Now, we might expect Jesus to say something like, awesome, James, John, see? Good thing we didn't kill him. Look at this guy. Go, get him a nice place by the fire, get this guy some membership forms, give him a glass of wine. He looks really tired. Come on in, sit down, take a load off. We're so glad you're going to join us. Like, wow, a scribe. We'd love to have scribes. Matthew's over here. Why don't you guys, right? So we'd think maybe this is the approach that Jesus would take. Instead, he gives a warning here. Kind of a realistic comment of if this guy's going to follow him anywhere Jesus goes, this is what it is going to entail. Foxes have dens, birds have nests. The Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He basically says, look, my lot is one of essential homelessness. Now, it's true Jesus had a home base up in Capernaum, and he's back and forth out of there. But Jesus says, essentially, this is his lot in life. He doesn't even have a place to sleep, essentially homeless. And notice, Jesus, that's not the easiest thing Jesus could have done. I mean, the far easier thing would have been for Jesus to plant himself in some city, Capernaum would make sense, and just stay there. He's a skilled healer, word would spread, people would come to him. He could collect gifts, he could make quite a little center for himself. You know, and Jesus could make people come to him if they wanted. But instead, Jesus has pursued a harder road of wandering, going from village to village. Even when there's big crowds that wanted him to stay, sometimes he's like, nope, we got to keep going. So Jesus has chosen the harder thing, and he warns this guy about this. So does this mean that we are going to be literally homeless if we become a follower of Jesus? Well, clearly not. And Jesus did not even ask this of all his followers at that time. So how does this function to us? Well, I think it functions to us as a reminder that following Jesus, being his disciple, will and can come with very serious costs and challenges. If Jesus' lot in life was one of suffering, as this kind of homelessness certainly is today and was back then, if we're to follow him, odds are decent we're going to share somehow in that suffering. Jesus says this elsewhere. Look at the screen. This is Luke 14. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus. And turning to them, he said, so glad you guys are here. Let's all get hotel rooms and we'll come together with a plan for how we can sustain ourselves and support one another and have a good time. And, well, look at verse 26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? As we know, price of lumber can change, right? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he's able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Wow. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. It is thrown out. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. So again, a sober warning for would-be followers of Jesus. Jesus says, look, consider the cost. Look what one Christian leader from the prior generation wrote. John Stott, he is dead now. I printed this on your outline. You can look at it there if you like. The Christian landscape is strewn with wreckage of derelict, half-built towers, the ruins of those who began to build and were unable to finish. For thousands of people still ignore Christ's warning and undertake to follow him without first pausing to reflect on the cost of doing so. The result is the great scandal of Christendom today, so-called nominal Christianity. In countries to which Christian civilization has spread, large numbers of people have covered themselves with a decent but thin veneer of Christianity. They have allowed themselves to become somewhat involved, enough to be respectable, but not enough to be uncomfortable. Their religion is a great soft cushion. It protects them from the hard unpleasantness of life, which changes its place and shape to suit their convenience. No wonder the cynics speak of hypocrites in the church and dismiss religion as escapism. So we got to wrestle with what Jesus warns here. Like, this is not all fluffy bunnies and unicorns and rainbow cotton candy, right? Okay, so this first guy that comes to Jesus, that Jesus responds to in this way, how does the guy respond to what Jesus says? What do they tell us the guy does in response? Well, that's kind of a trick question. We're not told, right? So we don't know how the guy responded to this. Well, the effect of that is it kind of makes the question sit on us. Okay, how are we going to respond to that? We have another conversation, another interaction recorded here. Look at Matthew, in your left column, verse 21. Another disciple said to him, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." Notice Luke has this in response to Jesus, who said to the man, "Follow me." So this guy is another would-be disciple. He's ready to follow Jesus. He wants to, but he asks permission to do something first. First, let me go and bury my father. Now, it's possible the dad has already died and he just needs to oversee the funeral arrangements. Or it's also possible maybe the dad's kind of elderly and sick and close to death, so it'll be a little longer wait. Either way, is this a reasonable request? It sure is. This is an absolutely reasonable request for all sorts of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is there are fewer, more important obligations in first century Jewish society than to care for your parents, and particularly to care for them at death and to bury them. One of the marks of godliness and piety in ancient Judaism was burying the dead and help bury those dead who had no one to bury them. So these are one of the marks of godliness. These are one of the strongest ties of obligation in terms of family and culture and expectation. And in fact, look at this passage out of the Babylonian Talmud. This is a compilation of Jewish rabbinic tradition. Notice how high a value taking care of one's deceased family is within Judaism. Look at this. The rabbi said this: "He whose deceased relative is lying before him," meaning before burial of the body, "is exempt from the resuscitation of the Shema," the creed of Judaism, "from the prayer, and from wearing phylacteries, and from all religious duties listed in the Torah." They said, look, burial of a relative, this takes precedence and releases you from every other religious obligation. So is this a reasonable request that the guy asked Jesus? Absolutely. And so, of course, everyone knows Jesus is going to say, of course. Well, look at verse 22. Are we in Matthew? Yeah, Matthew, verse 22. Jesus actually says this, we're told. But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." I mean, that is brutal. I mean, that is incredibly insulting. That is incredibly insensitive. Like, you're saying to this guy whose heart is broke, this guy's in mourning, either his dad has just died or is about to die, let the dead bury their own dead. Yeah, right, cancel him. Can you imagine if that was a public figure today and he tweeted something like that? I mean, we'd be all over him. And I'm sure, jaws must have dropped when Jesus said this. Because not only is it insensitive, insulting, it goes 100% against all the religious expectations and cultural expectations and family obligations. And the crazy thing is burying your dead relatives, and is this a good thing to help your family? Like, this is not a bad thing. He's not saying, well, geez, I want to run down to the casino. I got to try to put some money together for our trip. Just let me do that. It's not, right? He's asking permission to do a good thing. And Jesus says, no way. Very sobering. What does he mean, let the dead bury their own dead? Either he means, those outside the kingdom of God who have not responded to Jesus are spiritually dead. So maybe Jesus means let the spiritually dead bury the physically dead. Or this could be a rhetorical way of just dismissing the whole thing and saying, let the actual dead bury the actual dead. In other words, your dad's dead, he's in the underworld, let the dead take care of him. Either way, very jarring, very sobering. Okay, so how'd the guy respond? Same thing, we're not told. Now, we can kind of guess how he would respond, but we don't know. And again, that sort of lets it sit on us. How would we respond to something like that? Are we willing to have the same kind of disregard towards even our families if they stand against us following the call of Jesus on our lives in pursuit of the kingdom? I mean, we saw Jesus say that in the previous thing we read, right? If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brother and sisters. So it all kind of fits together. This is Jesus' radical call. All right, Luke alone records one more request. Again, very reasonable. So look at Luke, verse 61. Still another said, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family. Now, does that sound reasonable? Of course. How long is that going to take? Probably not very long, though maybe Middle East, maybe a little longer we might expect. But still, it's not going to take forever. What, you're just going to leave without saying goodbye? You're just going to disappear and they're not going to know where you are? Is that really the responsible thing to do? So this is a very reasonable request. And in fact, it's one with biblical precedence. So look at this, coming out of the Old Testament, the story of the prophet Elijah and Elisha, 1 Kings 19. So I wish they would have changed their names. Like Elijah should have said, Elisha, you need to change your name because for thousands of years, kids are going to be confused about this. Like it would have been worth it, Elisha. But whatever, we have Elijah and Elisha. So the prophet Elijah asked God for a helper. And God says, okay, Elisha you will have. So look at this scene on the screen. So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Okay, apparently this was some sort of understood symbolic call. Elisha understands this. This is him being chosen to accompany Elisha and to come and be his follower or servant or disciple. So verse 20, Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I'll come with you. Go back, Elijah replied. What have I done to you? Meaning, okay, go do it. So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. Okay, so there's another kind of radical commitment, like burn the bridges, you know that, burn the ships, there's a song, right? Okay, should be burn the oxen or burn the plows, right? So Elisha responded with wholehearted obedience. There's biblical precedence to follow a prophet. Can I go back and say goodbye to my family? So of course the answer should be yes. Why wouldn't it be? Well, we're prepared for what to expect. Look at Luke verse 62. Jesus replied, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Wow. I mean, that image is, of course, all right, I'm going to start plowing. Wait a minute, I'm not sure I want to plow. Maybe I don't, right? I mean, maybe you're still going to do it, but looking back and hesitating, Jesus says, unacceptable. So again, a third over-the-top, crazy, extreme sort of expectation. And again, we're told not how the guy responds. So again, it lingers with us. How will we respond to this kind of challenge? Well, let's put it this way. Bottom line. I think pretty transparently this is what he's saying to us. Be unflinching in your allegiance to Jesus. Right? Be unflinching in your allegiance to Jesus. These sayings are all about commitment, all about resolve, all about not backing down, all about willing to suffer, all about elevating the priorities of Jesus above other good expectations. So there is this idea of loyalty and allegiance, which we must hold firmly to Jesus above all else. So 3 suggestions about how we could do this. First, by honestly wrestling with the cost of it. Right? I mean, that's worthwhile in the front end, especially. That's why Jesus says to those crowds, count the cost. And occasionally I've had circumstances where there's someone that wanted to be a follower of Jesus or be baptized. And in essence, I've talked them out of it. I remember one conversation with a person, and the person, hey, I want to be baptized. And I sat down, and the first question I always ask is, well, what makes you want to be baptized? And the things I was hearing was not the reasons why we should be baptized. Why should we be baptized? This is a response of faith. It is our commitment to follow Jesus. This is the outward ceremony of becoming a Christian, joining with Jesus in his death and resurrection, like Travis did here. Death to the old life symbolically, death to sin, rising again. Now I'm following Jesus. And I didn't say don't be baptized, but I said consider the cost. If you are going to be a follower of Jesus, you have to be willing to go down a different path. You need to be willing to suffer to follow Jesus. You need to put allegiance to Jesus above all else. And I talked the person out and didn't get baptized. But I think that's better than running someone through the motions and giving them the false impression that they're rightly aligned with Jesus. Because that could be most dangerous of all. If I think I'm okay, like the worst thing about having cancer would probably be not knowing I have cancer. Right? If I know I have cancer, I can do something before it's too late. Worst thing would be not knowing or someone telling me, you're fine. So I think we got to wrestle with this, the cost of following Jesus and what we are asked to do. Now, it is true, God grants us a relationship with him through Jesus by grace. This is a gift. It's not something we earn, and yet to receive it becomes the complete response of the person. And it calls upon all of us to receive it and to come into union with him. So that'd be the first thing I'd say. Second, how about this? By engaging in practices that will strengthen it. It being allegiance to Jesus. If we think about how do we strengthen our faith? How do we grow in our allegiance to Jesus? How do we grow spiritually? How do we be more obedient? How do we be more holy? How do we be more faithful? Whatever terminology we want to use, I think if we cast our eye across all the Christian tradition, what most Christian churches and traditions have said is there is stuff we can do about this. And what most Christian traditions have said is the way to grow spiritually is to practice certain spiritual habits or disciplines or rhythms built into our life that shape our desires and shape our behavior. So these are things we do to place us in a position where God will most easily bring forth spiritual growth in us. So typically we call these spiritual disciplines. And one way we can strengthen our allegiance to Jesus is engaging in practices that will strengthen it. So next week we're going to start our fall series here. And I'm calling this Discipline Equals Freedom. And this is going to be a focus on precisely this. First of all, what is spiritual growth? How do we think about it? We'll start with a model for understanding, okay, how should we think about growing spiritually as a Christian? And the bulk of this will focus on these different practices or habits or disciplines that we can engage in and build into our lives in order to shape our desires and our behavior to grow spiritually. So what? Things like prayer, fasting, solitude, confession, silence, and on it goes. So I hope you will engage with me on this over the next few months, and I'm going to challenge you to practice these, try out these different things. Like we'll do a week on one, we try it this week, try the next thing. And I'm going to ask you to do some challenging things too, to go above and beyond if you really want to get serious about trying something new. By the way, did you know that your life is perfectly designed to give you the results you have now? That's a great line. Our lives are perfectly designed to give us the results we have now. So this fall will be a chance for us to shake ourselves and to try something different in our spiritual lives, to try to go down a different path. The other thing I'm going to do every week, I'm going to give you some discussion questions and guides along with the insert. And what I would like you to do is think about, for the course of this series, getting together with another person or a small group of people every week to discuss your experiences in trying these things out. So we're not going to do what we did like 2 years ago and try to help people get into formal community groups. This is going to be completely informal. I want to give you the questions and the discussion guides. I want you to find somebody or a small group of people that you would like to process this with. Meet once a week, meet every other week, meet every day, meet 10 hours a day, whatever you want to do, I'm okay with, whatever is going to help you. Think about maybe reaching out to somebody who's not in the orbit of a church. Maybe there's someone who's kind of interested in spiritual growth, but you know they could use some pushing. So say, hey, we're doing this thing in my church. Would you like to try out these practices with me over the course of this fall? So the hope is that we grow in building these structures and habits and practices in our lives that will, over time, by God's Spirit, strengthen our allegiance to Jesus. So we'll start that next week. Third, by being ruthless in dealing with what hinders it. It, again, being our allegiance to Jesus. I mean, that kind of seems to be his point here. A radical call, being ruthless with what hinders discipleship and allegiance to Jesus. So I gave you some blanks there. What's one step you can make towards these goals now? Are you willing to do it? Are you going to do it? Those are uncomfortable questions. Well, we have a good opportunity to reflect here and even make some decisions now. We're going to celebrate communion. And the celebration of communion, or the Lord's Supper, is, if you will, a recommitment to Jesus every time we do it. As you take the bread, as you take the cup, this is you once again welcoming the body and blood of Christ into you. This is renewing your commitment to the covenant that God has made with you through Jesus. As such, this is something given for those to engage in who are already followers of Jesus, believers in Jesus. If that's not you yet, tell you what, how about you make that decision literally right now? Be like, okay, you know what? Yes, in the quietness of your heart, you sit there, say, God, I confess I'm a sinner. I realize I've been on a wrong path. Lord Jesus, I believe you died on the cross, rose again for my sins. This is it. I'm giving my life to you. I follow you now. So if you hand the heart of your life over to Jesus right now, guess what? You're a committed follower of Jesus and can participate with us. Please do that. Why not? No need to say goodbye to your family. No need to bury the dead. Be radical. Why not? For the rest of us, or if you're not ready to do that yet, super glad you're here. It's totally okay to pass along the plate. Or maybe there's another reason you might not like to participate in communion today. That's okay too. If you're here and fall into those categories, spend this time in prayer or quiet reflection instead. So at this time, the ushers will come forward and we'll pass out the bread. So just be quiet, pray, reflect, and seek what the Lord would have you do. Another good opportunity to confess sin, right? If you look at those blanks on the bottom and you're like, okay, I can see some of these things that are hindering me, confess it to the Lord. Let's deal with it now. Okay, well, today we wrapped up this series by looking at a few final hard sayings of Jesus. 3 little vignettes of conversation that are extraordinarily hardcore. And we said the bottom line for us, to be unflinching in our allegiance to Jesus. And here's something that we continue to struggle to do for the rest of our lives as believers until the Lord returns or we go to him. So this Sullivan Blue letter, great example of commitment, incredible to reflect on the courage there. And he was really solid until the end. So in the Battle of Bull Run, apparently, I read about this a little bit this week, his unit had to hold some ground or something, or they were attacking, and so he rode out in front of all of his troops on his horse and was rousing them on, and a Confederate cannonball hit him and took off his leg, killed his horse. So he was taken to a hospital, and his leg was amputated. So he lived about another week in the hospital. So he did have plenty of time to reflect and think, and I'm sure he was thinking of his wife, Sarah. Now, sadly, his story took a real grim turn because he was buried, but shortly after that, his body was actually dug up and mutilated and mistreated by some Confederate soldiers thinking they were digging up and mutilating the body of the Union colonel who had kind of been in charge of the operations. So they dug up his body, they burned his skull, trying to take the skull as a trophy, apparently, and kind of threw his remains in a river. And this got figured out. There were some eyewitnesses, and so the Union soldiers finally came and recovered the colonel's body and some pieces of bone and hair and some of Sullivan's shirts, and they were put in a coffin and brought back. And so this caused a ton of national outrage in Washington and in the North over what had been done to him. And he was buried in Providence by his wife, eventually by his wife many years later. So it just reminds me that despite the courage and the dedication and the follow-through, we're not necessarily promised a glorious, happy ending, right? And so it may be that our path of following Jesus will be much like Jesus' path of suffering and rejection. And so really all of our hopes are pinned on his return one day, resurrection, and the restoration of all things. Let's pray. Father, again, one last time, we ask for some measure of this resolve to be found in us. And we freely admit we're a bunch of goofballs and we mess up, and we're not going to be able to do anything like this unless you help us and guide us one step at a time. So we pray for your mercy and grace to do that and help us to be faithful in our day to Jesus with the opportunities and circumstances you've given us. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. Don't forget, service time change next week. Don't be super early or super late.